What's up, Elena? Can you hear us? We can't hear you yet. Let's see. Hmm. Um, Let me try toggle between this real quick. And then sound is plugged in. Hey, can you hear us, Elena?
I,
I think
I can hear you. Yeah.
we can hear you. You're good now.
Oh, all right. I disconnected my mic. I had a mic on the laptop, so we'll just forego the microphone.
Okay, great. So this is, I know you can't see him right now, but this is the class up here.
Hi,
Say hi,
hi,
everybody.
everybody. Wish I
And
was there in person.
I know we're gonna get you down here in real life soon, but what I'll do is I'll introduce you, and then we'll get right into the presentation. And the students have already, asked if there's gonna be questions afterwards, and so they're eager to chat with you. So we'll have some fun with it.
All right.
Cool. So it's safe to say that the class, and especially this class, would not look the way that it does without the work of Elena Romero. As a journalist in the 1990s, Elena Romero covered hip hop fashion's rise in outlets like Honey, Savoy, Vibe, Latina, Urban Latino, Sportswear International, USA Today, and the New York Post. In 2002, Romero began her teaching career and has transitioned into full-time teaching in 2019, now serving as the assistant chair and assistant professor in the marketing communications department of the J. and Patty Baker School of Business and Technology at the Fashion Institute of Technology in Manhattan. Her work can be found in books like Freestylin, which we've read much from in this class, How Hip Hop Changed the Fashion Industry, and Fresh, Fly, and Fabulous, as well as documentaries like Fresh Dress, which of course y'all watched on the first week of this class, and the remix Hip Hop Times Fashion, which came out in 2019. In addition to all of this, she is currently pursuing her PhD in urban education at the CUNY Graduate Center, studying diversity, inclusion, and equity in public schools, and Latino parent engagement and school choice in New York City. So please give a warm welcome to a scholar who I'm proud to call a friend, Elena Romero.
All right. Thank you. Nice to meet everyone. Um, I need to share my screen, I guess, so we can get the PowerPoint started. What should I do? Did you give me access to do that?
Yes, you should be able to. There's a little button at the top that says share with like a little box and an arrow pointing up. Do you see that?
Yes, I do. I do. Okay, screen, choose what I want. It says need link. Oh, gotta love. Uh, let's do entire screen. That should do it. Let's see. Is it sharing?
Yes, so we can see the web page right now. We can see ourselves.
Let me see if I can pull up my. I'm going to let you know right now if you see that lovely overcrowded screen of mine, do not judge me. All right, are you able to see my screen? Is everyone able to see me and the presentation?
Hold on, just one. Let's see.
Are you
Just
seeing
hang
it?
on one second. Oh, here we go. Okay. Yep, we can see just fine. Yep.
All right, so today's presentation is going to focus on the importance of Sean John. So I'm going to focus on looking at it from a cultural impact, a business influence, and overall the legacy that the fashion brand had on the fashion industry. A little bit about myself. I covered many of the brands in their kind of heyday in the 90s at now defunct DNR and at Women's Wear Daily. And I was one of the trade reporters at the time that broke the story that Sean John got into the clothing business in 1998. I had a pretty extensive relationship with Jeff Tweedy, who would become executive vice president of the brand. And I had been following his career from being at Carl Kanai, knowing his background, having worked with Spike Lee at Spike's Joint, having started his career at Ralph Lauren, moved over to Mecca USA, and eventually Shaq's Twism line, and then eventually coming on board with Sean Combs. The idea behind this particular brand was to elevate streetwear. At that particular time, urban fashion was starting to be oversaturated, and the timing was kind of just right to kind of give it a more elevated high fashion appeal, and continuing to lean on hip hop, but provide some sort of luxury aesthetic using the image and likeness of Sean Combs, who would go on to use his first and middle name, Sean John, as his signature brand. I couldn't find my original cover when I broke the story. That cover had Sean Combs in a black signature t-shirt with his embossed name on it, and he had a baseball cap. But these are two of the three covers that Sean Combs would have at DNR while I was editor. And so he launched the line with a small collection, and that would go on to expand into a much larger assortment of fashions. The initial assortment included some tees, some denim, the velour hookup suit. I remember receiving a cream one in its initial launch phase, and some other items. So I'm going to walk you through kind of mini timeline, because we're really looking in a short amount of time to talk about the 20-year impact of Sean John. And so right out the gate, Sean John had a launch event at Bloomingdale's, and there was this big feature piece in Vogue magazine entitled Puffy Takes Paris, shot by Anne Leibovitz. Combs would appear alongside Kate Moss and Jean-Paul Gaultier, Karl Lagerfeld, Oscar Lorenza, and many others in this particular editorial, which would really position him really alongside some of fashion's elite. No conversation about Sean Combs during this timeline can go without talking about his impact or influence on Jennifer Lopez, known as J-Lo, and her style. These two looks that I have on the screen are ones that really kind of cement, when we think about the courtship of J-Lo and Puffy, two of the looks that are very well known, one of which was the famous Versace green dress, which would have a remake some years later in more recent times. That particular dress with the open navel became an iconic image, one that is, you know, one of the most searched images on Google. In addition, the other look is one at the VMAs, where J-Lo's wearing the encrusted Swarovski crystals on the bandana, and in an all-white outfit. Obviously, Sean John would have quite a bit of success, having Sean Combs been nominated for CFDA several times before actually winning that coveted menswear award. By 2000, we start seeing the brand on the windows of Bloomingdale's. Bloomingdale's, part of the Federated Department Store umbrella. Macy's, also part of that mix. Very important. At that particular time, the windows of department stores were very limitedly given to kind of urban fashion brands. And I want to be clear in terms of this labeling. Industry-wise, the labeling of the fashion, all of this fashion came out of a category called young men's, and it was basically youth fashion. And so In the 80s, that fashion tended to come from the West Coast. That pendulum swung once hip hop became mainstream. And so that young men's category had a number of subcultures that would influence that style. Surf and skate, a lot of that West Coast culture was a big influence in the 80s. And we see that pendulum swinging to more of an East Coast vibe now, that hip hop flavor, and trying to categorize that fashion. Different labels or monikers were given by garmentos. So we would hear things like ethnic, black fashion. And eventually the industry settled on this word urban, which was kind of a double-edged sword. It was kind of stemming out of how music was being categorized at that time. But over time, its usage and how some of those brands felt were being pigeonholed would give it the same kind of connotation that the N word would have. Sean Combs was very involved in his brand. Prior to Sean Combs launching Sean John, Russell Simmons had launched Fat Farm. But I would say the main difference between these two moguls is, in fact, that Sean John was directly tied to the image and likeness of Sean Puffy Combs. Combs spent quite a a lot of money, more than $1 million, to kind of run his first nationally televised runway show during Fashion Week on E-Television and Style Network, obviously leveraging his power and influence, something that at that time, urban fashion brands could not really have. Prior to this, I would say the largest kind of television run of a campaign, I would say, was the unofficial campaign of the LL Cool J FUBU Gap ad, which I'm not sure if all of you are familiar with, where LL Cool J was able to wear an FB cap in a Gap commercial. And in the lyrics, he says that the Gap was for us, by us on the low. That was an unofficial campaign for FUBU. That was an actual Gap campaign. But in terms of the brands and how much advertising dollars they had to be able to promote their brand, nothing had been seen to this level. So really, Combs, again, elevating the style and fashion worn by those in hip hop culture and putting it, on live television. Sean John would start having, by 2001, product extensions. So beyond the denim and the tees, the kind of the basic collection that would be found in Young Men's, now through licensing, he launches underwear, has a show at Bloomingdale's, was interested in, and had planned the Paris runway show for 2002, but 9/11 would change all of that, and that show would be canceled. I actually worked at 25 Broadway. It was the home of Fairchild Publications, where DNR and Women's Wear Daily were housed. Adjacent to our building is Cipriani's. I had the opportunity to cover the Sean John show at Cipriani in 2002, which cost them over $1 million to be able to produce. A very popular fashion show that again brought Sean John an elevated fashion experience, very much in line with those of mainstream fashion designers here in America and in Europe. Star-studded, every top editor that you can think of was sitting in the front row. Sean John as a persona, we get to see him beyond just the bad boy image. He ends up running a marathon and raises more than $1 million for children's charities. And I think that's important to note, that beyond using his likeness for fashion, he was moving in a lot of different spaces. In 2003, Combs spends about $1.5 million to produce his next show. And he starts getting now investors to invest in his brand. Originally, he had invested some of his own money. And again, in 2003, he gets another CFDA nomination. In fact, he gets about 3 nominations before he actually wins in 2004. A big feat for Combs, who wins that top, again, menswear designer of the year back in 2004, beating out Ralph Lauren and Michael Kors. At that moment in time, Women's Wear Daily had reported sales being about $450 million. Simultaneously, while he's winning the CFDA award, Combs appears on Broadway, playing in Raisin in the Sun. And he also starts acquiring brands. He ended up acquiring 50% of Zach Posen's company, Outspoke LLC. That would not be the only brand that he would have interest in. So part of the Sean Combs empire or fashion franchise, he had aspirations of owning multiple brands, not just his own. In fact, in 2004, he's able to open his flagship store on New York's Fifth Avenue and later open up a pop-up at Bloomingdale's, again, elevating the brand to new heights. At this point, not only does he have denim, but he also has tailored clothing. So he's really offering a full gamut of day and evening looks, for every man's needs. Up until that point, the business was predominantly driven by young men's fashion, and we start seeing many of the brands also adapt and incorporate and create women's wear or juniors fashion. So you would see FUBU had FUBU ladies, Mecca also has women's, and we see a number of other brands. Combs attempts to launch women's in 2005, but the brand does not stay with that, shuttering that for less than a year. At the same time, he's still promoting the Sean John brand. Combs is able to ink a deal with CBS to dress on-air personalities with Sean John for the 2006 NCAA basketball tournament. So we're seeing the marketing of Sean John and elevating it in various spaces, from having televised high elevated fashion shows to opening up a New York City flagship to starting to do sponsorship deals with the NCAA and attempting to get into women's wear. Many of the urban fashion brands would launch women's wear. Not all would be able to withstand doing that business. It's a different business model. And it was really coming from the male gaze. I think that's really important. While they did have Lady Aniche, for example, they did have some women's designers behind them. Overall, it was really being able to expand the brand in many of the same specialty stores that had been carrying their menswear, as opposed to having a very distinct business strategy to really move successfully in the juniors business. One of the things that really set the Sean John brand apart from some of the other fashion brands in that space was the licensing with fragrances. And in 2006, he launches Unforgivable, licensed by Estee Lauder. And we start seeing advertisement campaigns with Sean, in bed with two women. At this time, he's now being honored by the Accessories Council of Fashion Influence to being a fashion influencer of the year. He starts expanding his product assortments now through licensing, opening up and having sleepwear with Basic Resources. 2007, Unforgivable wins Fragrance of the Year at the Fifi Awards, hosted at the Fragrance Foundation, another very prestigious accolade. And he also launches Sean John Unforgivable for the women's market. In 2008, after a 5-year absence, Sean John comes back to the runway and he produces If I Were King. And this now, unlike the previous televised E! showcase, now is really in the form of a fashion show documentary that aired on MTV. And Sean John announces Nelly as his spokesperson for Sean John underwear and loungewear. FUBU had signed LL Cool J as its spokesperson. Uh, Willie Esco had a brief run-in with Nas as a spokesperson. So we're starting to see some leveraging of hip hop celebrities as spokespeople for particular brands. In this case, Sean John. And I mentioned earlier having 50% of the Sac Posen line. You may not be familiar with a brand called Aniche, the phonetic spelling of New York City. The guys behind Aniche had originally come from Mecca, USA. Interesting enough, Jeff Tweedy at one point or another worked at Mecca, USA, so very familiar with the gentleman that worked there. And at this point, Aniche, when the guys left Mecca and went to Aniche, they created the brand in partnership with Fila, one of the original kind of velour suit folks, and they launched their brand offering velour suits. Aniche, very similar kind of elevated product assortment in what Sean John was doing. I would say Sean John just kind of took it up a notch and moved it into a more luxurious lifestyle. Aniche was then bought by Liz Claiborne from Fila, and eventually Sean John ends up picking up Aniche to be part of its brand of brands in its collections under its house. So we saw that he continues to move into the fragrance space very well, launching now yet another fragrance brand, the I Am King fragrance. And at this point, we're starting to see less and less of urban brands kind of having dominance in the fashion space. And we see the strategic move by Sean John to be exclusive with one particular retailer. In this case, Macy's was selected to be the exclusive retailer for Sean John. At the same time that strategy is taken, the Fifth Avenue store is shut down, and Sean John would continue to sell exclusively through Macy's, continue to expand its assortment through footwear licensing, and in 2013, Combs then claims to have his first ever Instagram fashion show. So continually working various marketing strategies to keep the brand in the eyes of consumers. Fragrances work really well for Sean John, something that some of the other brands had not been able to fully engage in. In 2013, however, Estee Lauder decides to not move on with the licensee, and that ends up getting taken over by another fragrance company. And shortly thereafter, Sean John ends up signing and launching children's apparel. So again, you're starting to find it in various spaces. Now we've got children's, we've got footwear, we've got sleepwear or loungewear, we have underwear, we have a large fragrance franchise. Global Brands ends up buying the majority stake of Sean John in 2016, earning Sean Combs an estimated $70 million. At that particular time, it was reported in women's wear that Sean John retail had exceeded 525 million. Just to kind of give you some perspective, Cross Colors between 1990 and 94 had made about $100 million before it folded. At its peak, FUBU through licensing, we're talking about around 1998 or so, had made about $350 million. Now, Sean John bringing sales to 525 million. We start seeing another Vogue piece showing Diddy at 50, kind of giving an overview of his kind of music and fashion legacy, a classic article. And then we start seeing some changes, some lawsuits. In 2021, Combs actually files a lawsuit against Global Brands seeking $25 million for what he claims was false endorsements or misappropriation of his likeness and his publicity rights. In 2021, Global Brands ends up filing for Chapter 11. Combs is able to buy his trademark back out of bankruptcy court for about $7.5 million. This now with the hopes of kind of relaunching or reinvigorating the brand that at one point, made him more money than some of his own music did. However, 2023, just 2 years ago, just as hip hop is turning 50 or is being commemorated with a 50th anniversary, Macy's, interesting enough, decides to phase out of Sean John. So despite the fact that he's kind of reclaimed ownership and trying to reclaim, the marketing likeness of his brand, they start phasing him out. In some ways, it had been reported that consumer popularity in the brand was kind of losing its swagger. But interesting enough, that same time period is when we see the Cassie accusations of Diddy and the abuse, and in a now since settled lawsuit, which brings us to where we are now. That particular public settlement kind of helped kind of move this mega music mogul's career kind of in a downward spiral that's kind of also set the stage for the federal charges against him and multiple lawsuits that are still ongoing. As a result, we've seen quite a number of documentaries and docuseries trying to contextualize the downfall of Diddy. But I want to kind of focus on the favorable part, or what exactly was Sean John able to accomplish with fashion while some of the other brands had not. Some fun facts that you might have gotten out of my first book: when hip hop musicians realize their power in terms of their likeness, their brand, their music, they wanted to move beyond concert merchandise. Several decided to launch their own fashion brands. There were moguls and there were artists. Chuck D was among the earliest rappers that I met with his own brand, Rapsody International. And then there were groups, Naughty by Nature. Vinnie Brown had helped spearhead Naughty Gear, which would also have a retail store in New Jersey. Power, Ali Grant would launch Woo Wear with several stores, a flagship store in Staten Island, and then several stores in the Philadelphia area. So we start seeing some moguls. We mentioned Russell Simmons, Sean Combs, Damon Dash had launched alongside Jay-Z Rockaware. And so we start seeing moguls and music artists capitalizing on their brand. But what Sean was able to do was really elevate a particular fashion style that had been pigeonholed as youth fashion, considered kind of fad, not anything that folks in the industry thought would be ongoing and having longevity. But brands were able to prove that there was a viable market. Young people were really driving fashion. And Sean John was able to elevate the velour tracksuits in the very same way that Aniche was able to reintroduce the velour tracksuits that we once wore from Fila and kind of give it its own spin, this kind of urban luxe. And from a marketing perspective, Sean John just continued to elevate what had already been done previously by many of the other brands. One of the things that I want to give credit to the fashion brands like Your Meccas and the Karl Kani was really showing Black excellence, entrepreneurial excellence. And so again, Sean Combs utilizing his story, his trend-setting ability, and just putting it on full blast in every medium possible. What he was able to do was help shape and shift perceptions of so-called urban fashion from being, again, a fad or a niche to being elevated into that space of luxury that was once deemed only for European designers and select American designers. Urban fashion is American fashion, but it was not how it had been marketed. And Sean John played a very key role in the 2000s of really continuing this kind of modern feel and look of streetwear. Streetwear has evolved in how we use the word and coin fashion, but in terms of the influence of the celebrity and the music persona, it had taken it to new heights. And very important, an aspect that doesn't always get talked about is this showcasing of Black power and ownership in the fashion industry. No longer just fashion muses. Now we're seeing true leaders and owners, and not just trendsetters and influencers. Obviously, there was a huge celebrity impact. Those that were friends and fans of Sean Combs would also be a fan of everything that Sean John represented. So major celebrities, including Jay-Z, Usher, Rihanna, you would see the brand in music videos, red carpets, award shows, and collaborations with sports figures and various entertainers. As we said before, like most brands, the urban fashion brands started in predominantly kind of that denim t-shirt space. Sean John also having velours as part of his staple assortment, and would expand his brand through various licensing agreements, really setting himself apart with fragrance licensees, footwear, etc., and elevating streetwear in a way that it would now become normal and mainstream. A strong retail presence in department stores. These brands like Sean John and predecessors were built on the backs of mom and pop specialty stores. And in some ways, we kind of bit the hand that fed them. These brands shifted their business model from your local mom and pop and regional stores to major department stores like Macy's, and put most of their brand in those spaces. In some ways, kind of help kill the mom and pop specialty store and shifting the business model that had helped grown them. So on the one hand, Macy's, a very prestigious retailer, and being in that space alongside all the other major brands like your Tommy Hilfigers and Ralph Lauren was great. But on the other hand, we kind of stopped doing business, exclusive business, with the small mom and pop specialty stores that really cultivated these brands from infancy. Sean John was able to win the 2004 CFDA Menswear Designer of the Year Award, again, beating out well-established American designers, really a historic win, and being at the time among the top-selling, quote-unquote, urban fashion brands. And so I will give Sean John that credit of kind of helping redefine this space of athleisure, luxury sportswear meets streetwear, and making room and space for others to take that mantra and elevate it even further. The late Virgil Abloh, for example, and what he was able to do in a short period of time at Louis Vuitton, really setting the blueprint, not just for artists and moguls launching fashion brands, but other Black entrepreneurs looking to continue to promote and push modern streetwear. And obviously Off-White and Fear of God being kind of two of those status brands that would fall immediately after as a result of benefiting from the work of Sean John. So at this point, I'm going to end sharing my screen. That kind of gives us a good foundation as to the relevancy and impact of Sean John. And I'll leave the rest of our time really for dialogue and questions.
Well, thank you, and a round of applause, please, for that incredible history. While the students are thinking about their questions, because Sebastian, I know I saw you're ready, but could you, like, because we haven't talked about CFDA at all, and remember she spoke that like it's really significant that CFDA, that like Sean John won the 2004 CFDA award. Can you kind of explain for the students who might not understand why that's significant, why that specifically is so important?
So the CFDA is a fashion organization that stands for the Council of Fashion Designers of America. And Sean Combs becomes the first African-American designer to win Menswear of the Year in 2004. So that's very prestigious, and again, one of the first of many. Eventually, Dapper Dan, I believe, would also win a CFDA award, but Sean Combs became the first African American designer to do so in 2004. I will tell you that at the time of Sean Combs breaking into fashion, I don't know if people knew what to think of it in the industry. On the one hand, manufacturers were thrilled that they were able to see urban fashion brands make multi-millions out the gate at shows like Magic, which was a major fashion trade show where business was made. Let me backtrack a little bit. The Black consumer, Black designers, complicated conversation in terms of fashion and notoriety. Yes, previous to urban fashion brands, there had been African American designers, including the late Willie Smith of Willie Wear as one of our predecessors, Stephen Burrows, and I can go on. But in terms of uh, the the acknowledgement of the Black fashion consumer, I think it really took these urban fashion brands to show, in essence, that it made common sense and it made dollars and cents. Urban fashion, I talk quite a bit. I use the kind of the analogy of Black Panther. It just kind of took the industry by storm. It was unexpected, but it made perfect sense. It was the perfect time of first, where hip hop artists were now becoming mainstream. We were starting to see music videos pre MTV. I grew up in New York City watching Ralph McDaniels, a very important video music journalist who would have Video Music Box showing these artists as they're rising in their concert spacing, giving those one-on-one interviews. This is where the shout out comes from, stemming from his show. We start seeing now the music videos communicating not just fashion for concerts, which has had previously had an element of fantasy, but we're also seeing ordinary, regular streetwear now becoming part of their everyday wardrobe. In part because we didn't have the celebrity stylists, the big music wardrobe budgets. And so many of the earlier rappers were dressing themselves and they were getting their fashion cues from the OGs that they were inspired by. And hence now is where kind of folks like Dapper Dan and Harlem get introduced, where you want to look like the people that you want to emulate. So you go to the guy who makes the clothes for those people, right? And so there's power in sales, and so the industry had no choice but to embrace this new category of fashion that again had been, you know, had influences from the West Coast. Again, I talk about the pendulum is always swift moving from West Coast to East Coast. Surf and skate, a subculture. Hip hop becomes another subculture. Now, where we're at, the label of urban has kind of morphed into a more generic, palatable term of streetwear. And I have my in some ways, I have my issues with that label, only because in some ways we diluted the pure essence of the fashion trend. And my concern with those who created the fashion styles was if that was not a name that you liked, then pick one that you did and stand behind it. Unfortunately, the category of streetwear encompasses too many subcultures and too many fashion brands. And I think in some ways it hurt us more than it helped us. We're kind of again looking at fashion in ways kind of like through a white gaze, wanting to be like these other brands rather than kind of staying our grounds. But I feel like that pendulum is kind of swiftly moving, and I'm hoping that fashion is cyclical and we're going to see more support and within communities of color and supporting the independent designer and the few retailers that are still around.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I don't have my little mics today, so just make sure that we ask the question loudly. Sebastian, go ahead. Can you hear him at all or no?
I can, but it might make it easier if you repeat his question just to make sure.
Yeah, you come up too, yeah.
How you doing, Mr. Lane? How you doing?
Hi, how are you?
For my nieces and nephews up in here. But listen, I got 3 questions, right?
Sure.
I'll put them together. Okay, so now I'm a kind of cologne person, and I never heard neither one of them colognes that Puff came out with. And I'm just curious about, what year did he actually? I know you had it up there, but I couldn't remember. But when was this popping? Because I shop at Macy's, and I remember the velour suit. I was kind of. Then my thing is, what's hmm,
So the
yeah.
colognes were launched in the 2000s.
Okay.
So it all depends on where those fragrance companies have major distribution, and that's where they would sell it. So I would, put my guess that, for example, it might have not been at Macy's. It might have been in Macy's. I didn't necessarily look at where that distribution was. I just looked at the licensees. But they were definitely, there was three colognes that he had, and the Unforgivable brand, he also created it for men and women. So it was out there. Now that licensee could be domestic and it could be international. So whoever owns the licensee would then determine the distribution strategy. I don't recall what that distribution strategy was. I wish I could tell you specifically, but I'm sure we can Google it and figure that out.
All right, is they coming back out with the velour suit?
So Sean John owns the actual, like he owns his name back. He bought it back, but I don't know if for sure that brand is gonna make a comeback, or at least not anytime soon. I would say those who have some Sean John and sell it on, like an eBay, for example, will probably get a nice penny for it. But to answer your question, is like, will velour suits make a comeback? Yes, they're not. Velour suits are as common as a staple as denim, right? There's just certain things in our wardrobe that are key fundamental pieces. April Walker of Walkerwear, she has, her brand. Carl Kanai is still around. In fact, your professor and I were in Los Angeles recently, and we went to Carl's home and were able to talk with him for a little bit. Fubu has relaunched and attempted to make a comeback. Not velour related, but Cross Colors also has regained their trademark, and they're out and selling product again. And Kamora Lee Simmons repurchased the Baby Fat brand, and she also has been trying to relaunch her brand. So you're always going to find some of it. Some of it might be through your eBays and your resales, but some of the brands that have made a comeback will definitely be introducing velours, because again, that's one of the staples.
My last question. How do you feel with what all is going on with Sean? How y'all feel about that? And what's y'all stance on that? For still, providing, I don't know if y'all still with him or with his company or whatever. But how you feel about that? I mean, because I know y'all was close and everything, and how's the whole stable feeling right now?
I mean, I interviewed him a couple of times. I personally wouldn't say that I had a close relationship. When you say how we feel about it, I don't know if you mean from a New York standpoint, from a fashion perspective, or a fan perspective, or all of the above.
All of the above.
I will tell you that, having been a reporter for over 30 years and interviewing a number of celebrities, the life of a celebrity is complicated. And what all of you as viewers and readers see is a very small glimpse into their lives. I can't speak specifically to any of the accusations. I'm not familiar with them. What I will say is that very similarly to other musical talents in different genres of music who have had tremendous success. Personal situations many times can dim that light. I thought this presentation was important to give, to kind of put in perspective, separating the man from the brand, right? And it's hard to do that. One of the things that the music personas, when they decide on creating their fashion brands, they needed and not all separated their music entity, right, from their fashion entity. And so it's a double-edged sword. If you're red hot and your brand is affiliated to your music persona, then when your music sales are hot, so will your fashion. However, if your music sales are down or there is negative publicity around something that is directly connected to you, it will have dire effects on your fashion brand. So a brand like Sean John, the moment, interesting enough, hip hop was turning 50, Sean was not in the spotlight in terms of doing any kind of major marketing around his contributions in hip hop. I think there was a lot that we didn't know about that was in the works or in the pipeline, right? And so when Macy's cuts loose the Sean John brand is just as the Cassie stuff hits mainstream media. I think ultimately, it's too soon to tell whether the fan will disassociate themselves and disconnect themselves from the legacy of Bad Boy. I think it's complicated, right? To disassociate ourselves with the love of Biggie, the love of Jodeci, and there's just, Uptown Records, Bad Boy, there's so many, I'm 52. There's so many childhood or teenage or college memories that are associated with music. Think about life milestones. And when you think of songs, where were you? And the relevancy, cultural relevancy that music has to people's lives. I think it's going to be complicated. I think in the very same way, you're going to have fans who might know that a celebrity might have a complicated life, i.e., very similar to like a Michael Jackson. We still love Michael Jackson music. So I feel in many ways, Puff was an artist, but I think he's known more for being a mogul, an entertainer. And so the artists under his roster, I think, are ones that people are not necessarily going to completely dismiss. I think it's almost, in some ways, impossible. But I think each time you might listen to some music, it might land a little different. Other questions?
Yeah. Who else has questions about the presentation specifically? I have a question for you while people are thinking about their questions.
Okay.
So we didn't really talk necessarily about the or like didn't talk explicitly necessarily about like the aesthetics of Sean John and like how, like, because we've talked about, like the baggy silhouette for cross colors and like the big block lettering and the influence from the Afrocentric and Pan-African flag and, those kinds of things. And like the, deep pockets for walkaway, like those kinds of things. Like, what were some of the aesthetic qualities that were like distinct about Sean John? Like, in other words, like what made it that elevated version of hip hop fashion? Like, what were some of the visual elements that kind of talked about that?
Great question. So I'm going to backtrack and go with Aniche. Up until Aniche, I think Aniche started what Sean John was able to do. And what that was introduce better fabrics. You've got to understand that a lot of the urban fashion brands that were created in the late 80s, these were not folks that were necessarily trained as fashion designers and understanding production and design and fabrications. So we went with the easiest things that we could make, right? Cut and sew, hats, and denim. We kind of stuck to the basics. As as designers, as Black fashion entrepreneurs, learn the business and understand fabrication, we start seeing an improvement of fabrications. Listen, we could love all these brands that we want. They might have not been made in the best fabrics or in the best cuts in the early inception. They took multiple reiterations and seasons to get it and perfect it right. Once a niche comes in, now we start seeing a lot more better fabrications, i.e. we start seeing the reintroduction of velour suits that were very similar to the velour that we saw back in the 80s during the preppy era that Fila had made well known for. Sean John out the gate comes out with this kind of embossed lettering. He had like black t-shirt with black Sean John signature. The signature in and of itself was a recognizable logo, right? Part of something that could easily be spotted. So that embossed lettering was definitely something. The velour suit, right? In a very luxurious, soft fabric was definitely something that I think of when I think of Sean John. I think of its advertisement campaign being very critical in showing lifestyle, right? So now, in a very similar way that we saw advertisements exude what it is to have status, what it is to have generational wealth, what it different spaces where we are not necessarily seen in, but with us in it as the stars, right? So I think it's a combination of the fashion looks and the advertisement and the marketing campaign to help promote a particular message. Again, that Black excellence in your face constantly, exuding, his power. A lot of the style that we think of Puffy to have, his casual style, really was a lot of what you found in the clothing line, which again was the blessing and the curse, right? Because what he was offering was very much in line with like that uptown swagger. It was flashy, it was luxurious, it was furs. There was a lot of furs on the runway. So it was very Harlem. You would wear it with your uptowns. It was very clean. It was very basic. And then over time, he started getting into tailored clothing and accessories, again, promoting, the look from casual to evening wear. In many ways, in the similar way that, Jay-Z took the throwback jersey and kind of elevated us into grown-up wear, right? With the button up. Sean John also helped move that pendulum. Many of us now were aging, right? So we can't dress in the same way that we did as our teens. So this worked with our lifestyles for us to wear, to hang out, to play ball, to go on a date, to go to an evening event, so we were offered fashion for various times of the day. And that, I think, is what made the brand so unique.
Absolutely. Questions? Are y'all mad at me because I graded your midterms? All right, Elena, I have a question for you.
Okay, because then I was going to throw a question to them.
So I brought mine. Can you
Nice.
Can you kick a little history as to why this specific sneaker is important and why April chose to do what she did with Reebok with the sneaker itself?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing April Walker up. Many of you may not know that there were and have been many women that were behind many of the brands that we're talking about. April Walker was among the few females that really were able to work in a dominant male space. April Walker launched Walkerwear, and in the beginning, actually hid the fact that she was a woman creating a men's fashion line. She let the product speak for itself. So she's among the original female OGs, the godmother of, so to speak, of urban fashion. And she's another brand that has a lot of legacy and has been reintroduced to the public. And we're in a time now where we see a lot of celebrity and brand collaborations. This is kind of the trend space that we're in. That particular sneaker, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the style, is called freestyle. And in my time and generation, the freestyle sneaker was super important because it was the first sneaker marketed to women. It was an aerobic shoe, it was a dance shoe, and in the hood, they would sell it for $54.11 in New York City. That's with the New York State sales tax. We nicknamed them the 5411s. So that particular silhouette that April chose, which was a Reebok sneaker, for April Walker to do a collaboration with Reebok, and the freestyle Reebok shoe, the first shoe dedicated to women, she being the first woman in urban fashion, that collaboration is historic in and of itself. And she's offered it in kind of like a fall, fall colors to go in correlation with her current product offering on her website. You can get the product through her website and through the Reebok site. And I picked up my pair as soon as she put the message out that they hit retail. And I got them just a couple days ago.
Oh, yeah. You know, I had to do it. You said you have a question for us?
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on the Sean John brand and the kind of impact that it might have had in hip hop, in street style, or in your lives?
Okay, go ahead, Jules. Make sure you say that.
Okay, I was gonna say, like you said, I feel like with the Sean John, I know when I was a kid, I had Jay-Z was rocking with the RW.
Yeah.
I had that, but it wasn't really a lot. I guess I can say a lot of people wear Sean John where I'm from, at least, because I'm just from Southern State, maybe. I know that Sean John, you said, brings that northern, like, New York Harlem vibe. It just wasn't like that prevalent down, I guess, where I'm from. So I can't really say too much on it, but I'd say I did see like a lot of brands come from like, I heard about Sean John, it's never worked, but a lot of people like artists started coming out with like their own brand and like really putting in sport and stuff like that, which I was able to even have like a Jay-Z like big, like my mom developed. So I didn't really know too much about what it was.
It's interesting that you mentioned Jay-Z, because even though you think of Rockaware with Jay-Z now, the reality is that came much later, because it was really Damon Dash who was doing the day-to-day with the Rockaware brand, and Jay-Z took more of a back approach, and he came up in the front a little bit later with that particular brand.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Other reflections on like when you hear Sean John, like what did you know before this class? What did it mean to you growing up? What did you know about it? Sebastian, do you want to share something else?
I mean, I thought that Sean John, I mean, like you said, she said the vocal part of it, but entertainment. He not only brought this young guy, you know what I'm saying, but he brought the old guy out too. Some of the songs, the Biggie and that thing with the balloons, because he made the guys like, I'm 52 as well, so he made us, I'm already fly, but he said, we just fly, you know what I'm saying? So he had a mix, you know what I'm saying? That's why, like you said, it's still gonna be hard with what's going on. It's still gonna be hard to forget Biggie, Greg Mac, you know what I'm saying, Total, and all the artists with Casey. I grew up with Casey and JoJo, you know what I'm saying? So it's gonna be hard to forget them kind of artists, but he did bring a flavor. Like Greg Mac said, flavor, he brought a whole
and
style.
The flavor to the big and tall market, because you got to realize that, again, one of the things that this fashion genre did, including Sean John, was offer sizes that had not been accepted or even offered. When I was a kid, my mother shopped for me in the chubby department store section. Not exactly glamorous to have to know that you had to buy chubby fashion, right? So big and tall became more the acceptable, moniker for that type of style. And urban fashion brands were creating stuff in, 4, 5, 6 XL. So we have to thank, urban fashion for that. What didn't exactly translate or happen in the same way was for women. And part of it is because these brands were just creating their version of female clothes, but it was still made in their likeness, right? It's different. For example, we didn't get to talk about, you know, the ladies, where I think there's a tremendous opportunity for female rappers to break into fashion in ways that the guys did, and even more so. You know, the likes of like a Cardi B now would be a great time. Rihanna has created a multi-billion-dollar industry with Fenty. So there is tremendous, you know, success still. I think right now the men's fashion has kind of been oversaturated. And again, it's a different business model. Everything's moved to e-commerce, but I think there's a tremendous opportunity for the ladies. And in the very same way that they offered big and tall, to have plus sizes for women. So that way all women of all body shapes and sizes can benefit from having that swagger and that flyness.
Yeah. All right, y'all, can we give Professor Romero a round of applause?
Thank you.
Elena, thank you so much, man. It's a pleasure to learn from you.
Well, I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
On our next adventure. Did you tell him how we went to Cross Colors and we did a whole like walkthrough?
Oh, I told him all about it. I even brought in my I brought in my Carl Kanai napkin too.
Okay.
Sebastian's trying to grift some tickets, but I'll catch you. I'll message you on Instagram. We'll talk later.
All right. Thank you.
Take it easy.
Bye.